Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Fatherhood. So, there is, of course, some kind of barrages of different kind of things that I kind of remember from a number of other movies that are kind of put into here. Like, at some point we go on and we do have like a three men and a baby kind of moment where like all three of these guys are all singing to this child, hoping that eventually she'll sleep. As well as us going on and having like the Kramer versus Kramer moment where Matt is to find out that his daughter in this movie, of course, is hurt, but I'll get into more about that hopefully when we get into spoilers. Really, to me, like this movie is kind of tough to go on and say like this is something unique, because again it just kind of feels like it's borrowing and copying and doing a lot of stuff that we've kind of seen and other kind of things, even like something as simple as like Mr. Mom, but like Mr. Mom goes into some branches of like real chaos and uh like these moments where of course Keaton's wife is to think that he's having an affair or vice versa. There's that kind of going on within that story at some points. So we go on and we also have it at points where Matt, who is played by Kevin Hart, is to make mistakes. Go on and think that a certain show or something like that is appropriate for a kid to watch, and then it's like, whoops, my bad. Like, I didn't know any better. Like, I just thought it was a cartoon. So, we have it where, within this story, Matt is to go on and need to be a parent alone, and is to try to do the best he can to raise Maddie, but he's just very, like, this is his first time around at this. This is his first go. And so, not only that, eventually Matt is to want to eventually try and move on and eventually try to meet new people, and at some point hoping that those people may go on and help Matt, but then also Matt might be able to eventually like move on from his past, let's just say, in a very vague like motion. So I like this movie. There's several other flavors of so many other things that I've kind of seen as far as a parent film throughout time. We go on, we have the breakdown that Matt eventually has when he goes into this place for mother's room, and because there is no room for widowed dads or anything like that, eventually within the story. So we go on and we have this dad who is going on this breakdown, and he's just asking, like, my girl won't stop crying. Please help me. Like, what could I do to just stop her from crying? It's like, well, she's just kind of going through a phase right now. She's just going through colic. And he's like, oh my God, like, I gave it to her. Like, I made her sick. It's like, no, that's not it. It's just kind of a time during, like, a child's, like, digestion and everything like that. And he's like, oh, okay. Because, like, I guess, like, he like didn't go on to research much, or he didn't think that he had to, and now like he's presented with all the stuff that like he's just going on and just unprepared for and kind of winging it. And so we go on to this story and have Matt, who's kind of learning as he goes. And so it's an interesting story. There's a lot of range of different emotions. You're going to feel sad and teary-eyed, possibly. But then also there's a lot of fun moments. There's a lot of funny moments coming out of here. We have quite a few comedians that are going on and being a part of this film. So we have these kind of funny moments. especially with Jordan, where he's kind of going on and trying to hopefully figure out how to also like help Matt how to parent at some point. And so Jordan is going on, and like especially during this scene, we have it to where Jordan is just telling Maddie like, "Come on, like go to sleep. Like your dad needs to sleep. He's tired." And they're like, "Yeah, that's not good parenting." So, yeah, kind of teeing it up, kind of going through a lot of this movie, but I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers, anyways. Um, so I would have to say, like, this movie, like, is definitely a positive movie. Even though there is sad parts in it, I would have to still give it a thumbs up. I feel like it's a good film. Eventually, I know a lot of people would probably go on and be like, well, like, just imagine if you were ever a parent, then you would probably feel differently. Um, but yeah, like I had some good times with this film. I like films like this, especially when we have to go on and have Matt, who is just kind of struggling to figure out how a baby carriage and stuff like that works. It's like, well, yeah, no kidding. Like I would have to go on and I would work in this store that eventually would have this whole section full of like baby stuff that you'd have to kind of hook and put together. So it was really just like, yeah, like I'm not quite sure how this one exactly works. Like, can we see the picture of it? And like, we're like, oh, okay. So it has to like go this way, because there's like certain goofy things that kind of go um, into certain not exactly like cribs, but kind of like places that you would normally just kind of like put your child in, like rest your child in. That eventually there's like all kinds of these weird pieces that are to just like, well, hey, if you're gonna go on and you're gonna change the child, then you're gonna like put this over the thing and kind of rest the child in there, and then go on and change the child. Um, so, anyways, moving on. But yeah, like that, like there was some fun moments here, but maybe a lot of people would go on and be like, "Man, this is boring. This is life." Um, but at least like this movie, like really kept me interested, even though there was a lot of like a range of emotions or sad parts. But anyways, that said, uh, currently right now this is still available on Netflix. Go ahead and check it out. I just stumbled upon this movie and I'm like, okay, let's just watch this. Um, because I like movies like Mr. Mom and stuff like that. So every once in a while, I'll see this kind of movie, even though eventually it'll be like, yeah, why did you even watch this film? But anyways, let's go out of our way into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers about this one. Let's go into, of course, spoiler time, about that time getting spoiled this movie. So, as I kind of like alluded to in this movie, we have Matt, and this is spoilers now. We have Matt that loses his wife shortly after childbirth. So, in the beginning of this movie, we have Matt at this funeral who's going up and is wanting to do this speech. And he says, "Man, this sucks." And so, supposedly, he was to go up there and, like, just want a speech that he's gonna have to like say to everybody, and he just had nothing. He's like, I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know. Like, I wish I could trade um, anything to eventually have one more day with Liz. So we now go on into before Liz was, of course, still alive, and so Matt and Liz are going on to, of course, have this baby. And so we have Liz make it to the hospital, and so Matt and Liz like, okay, like they have it to where like Marion, who is actually Liz's mother, is like Skyping the whole time, and so she's kind of like watching on and stuff like that. So we go on and we have Matt, who is kind of with Liz throughout the whole pregnancy, and he ends up cutting the cord, and like he ends up telling like Liz he loves her and all this stuff, all the kind of the normal like I love you, you're doing great, like this. So Matt cuts the cord, and so we go on, and we of course have Liz, who is to kind of need to get out of her bed to go on and just kind of like walk a little bit and just kind of make it to this wheelchair. All of a sudden, when she ends up getting up, she all of a sudden is to start to feel dizzy and she collapses. And Matt's like, hey, what's going on with my wife? We have this nurse that's scrambling like cold blue. Everybody come in here. So, come to find out, we have Liz who had a blood clot in her lung, I believe is what they said for this movie. And that's how she passed away. I was like, wow, wow. I kind of figured that's what it would be the case, but still. So, we had Matt who gone through the funeral and is now at the kind of moment where everybody is kind of in this house, kind of giving their condolences. We have Jordan coming in, and Jordan is to go on and tell Matt, it's like, well, hey man, like that speech out there, like you went in, you winged it, and like you did the best you could. So kind of relaying what the speech was about, and so on and so forth. So we go on, and after the whole like wake and everything is over, the funeral is all over, we have it to where both Matt's mother and both Liz's mother just kind of are tempted to want to just kind of stay for another 2 weeks just to kind of help Matt out. And we have Marion that is wanting to speak to Matt and say like, well, hey, like I want to stay a lot longer. Like I think that you really need help for like the first 6 months of all this. And so Matt's going on and saying like, no, I'm fine. Like I can deal with this. Because we have it to where like everybody is not very optimistic that Matt is going to be able to handle this all by himself. And really everybody's saying that Matt is extremely immature, because Matt of course is to go on and do this whole joke about like certain appointments, and how Matt is making a joke about this like fantasy league thing that he's putting together. And and so we have it where the family is now putting all the cards on Matt. So we even have it at a point where Marion is going to tell Matt, it's like, well, hey, like maybe like Maddie would be better off if she like spent like a summer with us, like me and both Mike, like just to kind of help you out, or eventually maybe longer, like just to like try and really be able to help. And Matt's like, no, like I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna change all the diapers, I'm gonna do everything that I can. So there of course is some mistakes that he ends up making during the time of which that he is to go on and have Maddie as a baby. So at one point we have it where in this film Matt is to be changing her diaper, and he ends up accidentally getting crap on his shirt. And so he's like, well, I guess that won't be the first time that'll probably happen. So we go on, and we have Matt that's like trying to go on, and he of course is having trouble sleeping because eventually Maddie is consistently crying. And so he's trying to do everything. He ends up getting one pointer from a person to say like, well, maybe you need to just kind of like sing to her. And so Matt is going on and kind of rocking her little bed, and is like singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. You can just tell he's freaking exhausted. So we go on and we have Matt, who is like having like him and his two other friends come in there and sing to this girl, and that's not working either. And so we desperately have it where Matt goes to this uh like women's class that are all pregnant women, and he's like, I need to come in here, I need help. And they're just like, well, like, this is for mothers. And he's like, well, yeah, but you guys don't have like a father's class, so I'm here. Like, there's nothing I can do, so I'm coming here. Like, my daughter just won't stop crying. Like, what do I do? So like, maybe she has colic. Maybe she should go on and try to uh maybe it's something as simple as like white noise, like kind of like turning on a vacuum or a dehumidifier or something like that would work. So now we have Matt, who is to go on and use this white noise, like turning on a vacuum, and it works. And he's like, oh, thank God. Yes, victory. She stopped crying for once. And so we then have Matt going back to work at some point, and so his boss, who is actually Paul Reiser, who I'm like, hey, that's the guy from Mad About You and Aliens and stuff like that. So, and he plays Howard in this film, and like he was also in like Stranger Things recently. So Howard, when Matt just kind of first arrives, Matt's like, hey, like, as long as you need, like, you can take like as much time as you need to kind of like grieve. Like, I understand what's going on. And Matt's like, no, like, I really just need to work right now. And Howard's like, I understand that. Like, so Matt tells Howard that he wants to go on and mostly work from home, and that whenever like he's really needed, like he'll show up in the office and he'll do like things here and there. But every time when he does come into the office, he's going to be bringing his child in there. And it's like, Howard's like, I understand. So we go on and have Matt, who of course is doing this presentation to these people. And so while doing that, we go on and we have Matt that is like not only falling asleep during this presentation, and he wakes up and he's like, like, oh, okay, yeah, like, I'll start talking. Because Howard is kind of doing the pre thing, like the kind of intro, but then he's handing it off to Mike. So Matt wakes up and then he's going on and he starts a presentation, but then he's like, hey, do you guys hear crying? And they're like, I don't hear anything. And he's like, yeah, I think I hear crying. So he rushes off to his daughter that is starting to cry. And so Matt is to randomly find this vacuum that he's kind of pushing back and forth right in front of his kid to just just to get her to be happy again. And so we have all the people from the presentation following where eventually Matt went, and they're like, hey man, like, no, like, I get it, like, maybe she just kind of needs like skin to skin contact, but also like, hey, here, like, I have a white noise app like on my phone, like, it always helps me sleep. And so like Matt is like, oh, thank God, like, these guys are nice about all this. So Matt is going on and doing the rest of his presentation with his child on his shoulder. And so we go on and like Matt is thinking that he's going to get fired by Howard, and the woman who ends up doing the presentation, she's like, no, I thought this was great, I loved it. And Matt is just kind of still looking at his boss like, you're going to still fire me, aren't you? And Howard's like, no, like, I'm not going to fire you, like, believe, like, like, this is just like some, like, this is some hectic times, but eventually we'll get through it. Like, I believe in you. So we push on, and so Matt eventually is to go through the years, and his kid is to get older, and we have Matt who is eventually showing Maddie what school she's eventually going to go to, and then she actually goes to that school. So the first thing when we see when Maddie's a little bit older is Matt is trying to go on and fix her hair to give her a hairstyle or do something with it. Dory just kind of puts it up in a bun and like he hopes for the best. So we have it to where Maddie is stubborn and wants to wear pants instead of a skirt, and so this is kind of this like nun Catholic kind of school. So every single time it seems that Maddie or Matt is to get a talking to about Maddie's wardrobe, that she has to wear a skirt instead of pants. But Maddie wants to go on and wear pants instead of a skirt because every time she used to look at girls wearing a skirt, she's like, well, hey, I want to wear pants. And so it gets to the point where like kids are making fun of Maddie because she decides she wants to wear pants. So we also go on and have it when Maddie is being with Matt. And in the later part of the movie, we also go on and see like Maddie's first steps and like Jordan crying about it because he's like, "Hey man, like there's somebody over there cutting an onion or something like that." And I thought that was so like, yeah, of course, like you're probably gonna be very emotional when like these little things just happen. So and plus like spending so many years with this person and like, oh, now they can do this, oh, now they can go to the bathroom, oh, now they can, oh, right, great. So we have Matt that is with Maddie, and so she's going to school, she's having like bullies and stuff like that. Matt is to want to pick out like feminine underwear for Maddie to wear, and Maddie wants to wear kind of more of boys' underwear, and Matt's like, okay, like I accept that. So we have Maddie go on, and eventually, because Matt consistently, whenever some teacher is to try to arrive to talk to Matt about dress code, Matt just keeps going on and driving away. It's like, oh no, like I'm busy, like I'm sorry, I got things to do. And so what eventually happens in this movie is that Maddie is put into this office and then she is to be forced to wear a skirt. And so when then she does, she eventually is just kind of playing in recess, playing on this kind of this kind of this playground playset thing. And all of a sudden we go on and we have one of the kids who's mentioning that this girl has like, it looks like boys' underwear. And so she's being ridiculed by it. So we go on and we have this girl that gets so upset. Eventually she ends up falling off of this playset and then hurting herself. She ends up getting like wounded in the head. So like I know I'm fast tracking through a lot of this movie, but I wanted to get to this important part and then I'm going to backpedal a little bit here also. So because we have it to where Matt is of course become fairly distracted. So leading up to this point now, we go on. We have Matt who is to have his girl go to school, and it seems like things are working out great. And to all of a sudden, while Matt is to be at this party with one of his friends, he all of a sudden is to go on and meet a girl named Lizzie at this party. And so Lizzie is mentioning like, well, hey, like, wouldn't it be good to have a kid at this party? And Matt's like, well, yeah, like I do have a kid. She's right there. So she's like, oh, that's great. So while both Matt and Lizzie are talking, come to find out that Lizzie is an animator for some animated show that Matt is actually having his kid watch. So he's like, "Oh yeah, like I know that show." And so I was like, "Oh really? Like you're having your kid watch that show? That show's not suited for kids." And Matt's like, "Well, you would think there'd be a warning on the show." And she's like, "Yeah, there is." He's like, "Well, you would think that." So Matt's like, "Oh crap! Now I need to go and like see what my kid is watching." So, but Matt is kind of interested in Lizzie, and Lizzie's like, "You know what? This guy, like, there's something about him." So after Matt goes on and is to realize that he's having his kid watch the wrong thing, and Maddie's mentioning like, "Well, hey, like, aren't the two of them like both wrestling?" And then Jordan is trying to like help Maddie understand like what was going on between the two of them. It's like, well, you know, when two like people really love one another, and Matt's like, no, you're just not gonna watch that show anymore. Like that show is too violent, so you can't watch it. So, like, it's kind of like eventually like South Park. Maybe when I was pretty young, that all of a sudden, going on like there was one episode of South Park that me and my sister, I think, yeah, me and my sister were watching, and all of a sudden my mom walks in and she's like, "Are they cussing on this show?" And we're like, "Yeah, like it's funny." And she's like, "No." It's like, you guys, how about you not watch South Park? It's like, well, no, like we're not gonna go on and say any of the language and anything like that from the show, but there was just something funny about it. But then she's like, like you know, like I guess you kids are old enough and you're responsible, but still, like that kind of thing. So, like that always happens. Eventually, let me know in the comments below a story about you where you would probably go on to watch a show that you probably should not have, because eventually that happens all the time. Eventually, I like to watch a lot of stuff late at night when I was a kid, also. So eventually, you would get to see a lot of things that you probably wouldn't get to see normally throughout any good portion of the rest of the day. But anyways, so with that said, so we have it to where Matt goes on and is to eventually have Howard tell Matt, it's like, well, hey, Matt, like, you know what, like, you're really burning yourself out. Like, maybe you should, like, you should take a break. Have you ever thought of, like, getting a babysitter or, like, trying to go on and eventually, like, finding somebody that can help you out? Like, in a very nice way. So Matt goes on as to find this babysitter, and after he has like one time with her, he's like, "I'm never gonna have this babysitter again." Like this girl was too weird, and like to go on and like say it's like, "Oh no, like you need to respect the child and talk to them and and sing to them in a weird way and this and that." And so Matt is like, "Yeah, we're never gonna see that babysitter again." But so Matt would go out with Jordan to get some drinks, and it's like, "Hey, man, like you gotta be with somebody. Like, come on, like you gotta move on." So eventually, Matt moves on, and eventually gets a better babysitter. So Matt eventually is to consistently be with Lizzie, who eventually at some point they just call Swan. Or eventually, like Swan just says, like, "Hey, like you can call me like Butthead, or you can call me Dude, or you can call me whatever you'd like." So throughout the rest of the movie, they just keep calling her Swan, and I'm like, okay, because we have it to where Lizzie is asking Matt, it's like, well, like, do you think it's wrong that I have this? That I just coincidentally have the same name as the wife that you used to have, and like Matt's like, no, I think it's fine. So we go on and we have Matt and we have Swan, who are to eventually, like, things are going so well in the state, but it seems that more and more Matt is kind of telling Maddie that, like, well, like I need to go and do some grown up things, or like I'm going to uh like we have people covering for him because we have some of Matt's friends that's saying like, well, hey Maddie, like your dad's gonna be late for work, So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna watch you like play soccer, and we're gonna like watch you play. So more and more, Maddie and Swan are eventually just kind of hanging out and having fun, and that eventually leads to them getting intimate. And so when Maddie is to finally go on and take, or when Matt is to take Maddie to this carnival, we go on and we have Maddie, or God, I'm getting Matt and Maddie confused here. We have Matt who's telling Maddie that he wants to go on and finally break the news to her that there is someone in his life that he's been dating, he's been seeing, he's that it's a friend of his. And we also have one point where Matt is to give Maddie the necklace of his mother, or necklace of Maddie's mother. And like that was the one thing that Matt would always try to covet and would try to want to keep for himself, but then he ended up giving it to Maddie. So I'm saying this for a whole reason. So we go on and we have it where Matt and Swan, there's a time, of course, where Matt is sending Maddie off to school, and Swan is telling Matt, it's like, well, hey, like, if you take her to school, maybe afterwards, like, you and me can get together. And Matt's like, So he was so focused on that, getting these coffees and going like, hey, let's, like, I want me some of that. So Matt is sleeping with Swan, and all of a sudden is to get a phone call that Maddie is hurt. He had gotten 19 phone calls. So Matt all of a sudden is now scrambling, finding out, of course, where Maddie used to be held, and it's the exact same hospital that that of course Liz had died in, his previous wife. So Matt is making it to this hospital, and he does not want his daughter in this hospital, and so we have the doctor telling Matt, it's like, well, hey, she needs stitches, and she needs them right away. And so Matt's like, okay, fine. So Matt holds Maddie's hand and is to have her do stitches. So Matt then turns around and is to break up with Swan, just because he's like, yeah, like, I don't think that Maddie's ready for another woman in her life. Like, I don't think that I'm ready. And so Swan is just like, well, okay, like, I guess, like, goodbye. So, and then we have Maddie, who, like, didn't warm up to Swan at first, but then eventually liked her and is like, well, hey, where's Swan? And Matt's like, she's not here. Like, like, we broke up. So, and they went on and did those ducks and all in that park thing and had a lot of fun. So, but pushing on. So, eventually what happens is that Matt seems to be consistently going well in his job, to where eventually Howard is tempted to tell Matt, it's like, well, hey, like, I want you to go to Croatia. And Matt's like, what? Like, you know, I have a kid. Like, Croatia? Are you serious? Like, but Oscar is to also speak Croatia, and so does his wife. And so we have it, of course, where Matt is just wanting to kind of steer Howard that way. And so, but that the reason why Howard is, of course, wanting to tell Matt this is because he's like, well, hey, like, I'm moving up. Like, I'm moving up my position. I'm getting a higher position in this company, and I want you to take my job. And so Matt's like, wow, like, that's a lot, cuz we finally have it to where when Matt is to go on and say, it's like, well, like, I really need to go Croatia, like, I really want this promotion, like, he's just kind of thinking about uh consistently uh, like his daughter's like college tuition and how much college is going to be, and so that's what he's really thinking of, deciding to try to take on this job. So Matt goes on and he is to hand off Maddie to Marion, and eventually he's wanting to go to Croatia with Oscar. So we have Matt that's like having everything work out for him, and so all of a sudden he's like, you know what? No. No to all this. Instead of like getting a better job, instead of going on and doing all these things, Matt's like, no, I want my daughter. Like, I'm like thinking about all the moments that I had with my daughter, and all those like beginning moments of all the stuff that I'm probably gonna miss without her being in my life. So I'm gonna choose my daughter rather than choosing to go to Croatia. And so Matt is just going to rely on Oscar going to Croatia and everything working out. So Matt goes on and is to make his way back to Marian's place, and is to eventually just have like, no, I want my daughter, like I just want to see her again. And so we go on and have at some points where Marion is to spend a lot of time in Liz's room, and eventually she has started to more and more try to pull herself away from this room. But then eventually when Maddie comes to the house, we have it to where now Marion can share all these stories about Liz and all the stuff that Liz used to do. And eventually I guess that is a real coping mechanism. And so Marion going on and having like Matt again wanting to step up and be a dad, Marion accepts this and just like, well, hey, yeah, like, because we also had Jordan that was telling Matt, it's like, man, like, we were all surprised that you like made it as long as you did. Like, everybody was just kind of everyone was kind of second guessing you, and Matt is to go on and just say like, well, yeah, because I'm a bad father, and they're like, no, like, just kind of like, we're all surprised, but man, did you just like win? Like, you just did it. You just freaking win it over. Like, take the compliment of you just defying the odds. And like, we also had that moment when Matt was to not even realize that he needed to go on and do this checkup for Maddie, and Marion shows up and she's like, well, hey, like, today is this checkup, and Matt is like, oh, that's today. So Matt goes into this doctor, and the doctor is to go on and say like, well, yeah, like, Maddie is perfectly healthy, she's fine. And Matt's like, well, yeah, I'm not a good dad, I'm not this, I'm not that. And the doctor's like, no, you're doing wonderful, like, it's great. And so Matt is like, wow, like, I did it. Marion's like, well, yeah, that was one little like success thing, and you can go on and take every single like little success and just kind of like just keep that in you to just like keep you accepting that you're doing this right, that you're a good dad. So yeah, so we go on, we have Matt who takes back his kid, and through most of this movie, she of course is to have that like band-aid over her head, because she's of course having the scar. So we have all these moments where like Marion is to have this birthday and blowing out the candles, and like, interesting enough, we also have consistently, I guess Marion is living in Minnesota, and like, I thought that was also cool, because the consistent reference of Minnesota, even to the point where like Kevin Hart is wearing like the Minnesota shirt as he's like flying back to Minnesota at some point. So, well, of course, Maddie is kind of barfing it up on both Matt and this passenger as he was kind of looking at this kid like, oh, hey, yeah, hey, you. And then, blah, it's like, oh, well, I'm sorry. It's like, hey, man, no, it happens. So, but yeah, so I'm just kind of remembering every like moment that happens in this film. So after Matt is to go on and get Maddie back, he then decides to want to also go on and try to apologize to Swan also. So Matt goes and delivers flowers at Swan's place, and we have to where Matt is like, well, like I didn't know if you were ever gonna come down, so like I was wanting to maybe even drop these flowers here, but I didn't know if you were gonna get them, so like, and Swan's like, well, yeah, there's a lot of flower thieves around this place. So Swan is to take both Maddie and Matt back, but she wants to go on and have a private conversation with Maddie. And so Matt's like, okay. So Swan goes on and is talk to Maddie about like, well, hey, what's your favorite ice cream? And so it's like, well, I like coffee, I like this, I like that. And she's like, you like coffee? You don't like to drink coffee, do you? And she's like, no, I just like the ice cream. And she's like, oh, okay, all right. So we had it to where like Swan and Maddie are saying like, well, I think Matt has kind of waited long enough. Let's go on and get ice cream. So they're all going on and they're singing and dancing like by this fountain and eating this ice cream. And so we have to where Matt is telling like, hey, like don't drop the ice cream, don't spill. Um so yeah, like it's a kind of really interesting moment, but I think I also rushed through a lot of this. Um but yeah, like I enjoyed this movie. But I also like there's a lot going on in this film, so there's probably a lot that I forgot about. Um, but either way, at the end of the day, hopefully I covered most of this film. So with that said, because I had to backpedal also, because there's like, well, I want to get to this moment so badly, but there's a whole lead up to that also. But anyways, with that said, I think most of this covered. I think I'm just going to try to get out of here so I can go on and hopefully review another movie or show or something today. I don't know, like today is kind of one of those where it's like I probably should be getting to certain things or another, but then it's also just like, meh, like let's try this, like let's do something different. And different is not always good, but at the end of the day, it is what it is anyway. So bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.